now we are going to have a look at the challenges of shaping the workforce to meet the challenges of 2030, which isn't that far away. And we're going to talk about this with Cecilie Heuch, which I'm sure I've just pronounced wrong. And she is EVP and Chief People Officer at Telenor, and Freneka Mumford, who's Associate Director, People and Change at KPMG. So welcome to you both. So maybe Cecilie, you could introduce yourself, say a little bit first, and then Freneka.
Okay, so I'm the Chief People and Sustainability Officer of the Telenor Group, a telco that is present, has a geographic footprint in Southeast Asia and also in Northern Europe, the Nordics. And we are about 18,000 people, and we have about 180 million customers.
And a very diverse workforce.
Yes, we got many different nationalities, and it is a very interesting workforce because, you know, you have the Nordics and then you have Southeast Asia, very different populations, different cultures, religions, etc. And we work, and a lot of time we work in global teams.
Okay, Freneka, would you like to just introduce yourself?
So yeah, I'm Freneka. I have been leading our thinking at KPMG on the future of work, and most recently have been tasked exploring what that means from a KPMG perspective for our own 16,000 employees, as well as working with lots of our clients to explore what the future of flexible work means. So really pleased to be here today.
Okay, so I think there are maybe two strands, and I think the first thing is that how do you go about figuring out what skills and positions you're going to need in 2030, because there's got to be quite a long run-up time. It's not something you just, oh, we need, you know, 3,000 data scientists and there they are the day after. I mean, this is a very long process, and also a lot of retraining for existing staff.
Yeah, I can start. What we do is that we take as a starting point the strategy, so the business strategy of the company, and from there we look at what is needed in terms of competencies, because this is changing. And then we look at what are those competencies, and we have some that are important for all, critical skills for all. And if I'm looking at my list here, we've got automation and process, 5G, brand, cybersecurity, data and analytics, and customer interaction. So for those 6, we actually deliver something for everybody, training. And then we have deep dives in cloud and virtualization, partnerships. And we've just heard about partnerships now in the former speech, sales and distribution, product management, and customer-facing IT. And then we look at what are the, so that is what is needed. And then we look at what have we got as opposed to what we need. And then we have gap closing strategies to be very practical in every country that we are present in. So that's how we do it. And we look at different roles and what is needed in the different roles. And if you're in a particular role, want to get to another one, then we can tell you how to get there based on where you are today and the skill set you have today. So we're very structured about it.
So do you encourage people to change roles within your organization?
We do, and we also we've spoken about before the fact that people are a bit uncertain about what is happening regarding their jobs these days and their skills. So there is this urge to remain relevant. And if we as an employer can make sure that people have the opportunity to remain relevant, then there's a big interest from the organization and a big engagement. And we have seen that, and we measure the learning hours. we ask people to document what they have done, and we have it also as part of incentives in some countries. And we have this both this looking at the critical competences, so the longer educational programs, but we also look at the every employee has to do at least 40 hours training every year. And then they start with the critical competences that we have defined for everybody. And this has to go from the top of the organization to the bottom. So I'm also telling my people what I have done recently, and we're sharing a lot. And as I think I've told you before, we also have this in many countries, we have time set aside. So for instance, here in Norway, where I'm located, on Thursdays from 2 to 3, you can't book me because that's the learning hour. Just to be very specific and to tell people that this is not something we tell you and that you should do if you have time over the weekend. This is part of work to upskill, and you need to take responsibility. And people do, and they enjoy it.
So something I find really interesting, having written about digital transformation for, well, let's just say a long time, should we? I find it interesting that the received wisdom often is that people will push back hard against changes. So it's very refreshing to hear you talk about people welcoming the opportunity to stay relevant and to develop, as opposed to going into the bunker and hoping it'll all go away.
Don't you have the same, Freneka? Isn't this what you experience as well?
Well, I was going to ask you next. Yes.
I don't think there's really an option anymore. I think that the pace of change means that if you don't express those that curiosity, and if you don't have a culture of learning in the way that Cecile's described, it means that you will quickly become very irrelevant. And I think that particularly from what we see, it's the people that do express that curiosity to constantly want to reskill and refresh that learning, enabled by an organization that provides the space to do that and the structure to do that, is where success will be. And I think going back to the point around creating almost an internal talent marketplace, when you look at the business case around constantly trying to hire the skills in the market that just aren't there and are increasingly more difficult to find, you've really got to focus on building talent and building the ability for people to see opportunities in the organisation, feel confident that there's the right kind of enablers from a learning and culture perspective to support them into those new roles. But the research shows that people who move internally are more engaged. You've already kind of shortcutted all the investment in onboarding and building them into how we do things in this organisation. So I think particularly in this sector, it's going to be increasingly important to really focus on how you create internal mobility within an organisation and focus on building skills.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the two words that really struck me there, sorry, Cecilie, were the space and the structure, which is kind of what you're saying too, that it's about creating a culture and opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, with e-learning, I mean, it is nothing like what it was many years ago. I mean, now it's motivating. It's totally different. So it's accessible to everybody now. And I think, as Freneka said, in some markets, you just can't find enough of the skills you want for the future. It's just not existing. So you need to train internally. And then in other places, it's just so expensive. So, and thirdly, we have taken as Telenor, we made a choice. We want to build over buy. So develop internally instead of recruiting externally, and that creates a lot of engagement, and we've seen that in all our surveys. I mean, we've never done as many surveys, have we, as during COVID, to see how people are doing. Are they motivated? What is motivating them? And it's very clear, competence development is something that really matters to people.
Okay. I think one of the things regarding people at work is many developed a terrific sense of purpose during the pandemic, and that seems to me to be like sort of fairy dust, and the effect it has on people and their engagement. Freneka, you're nodding. I mean, what was your experience with that and productivity and people satisfaction? Did you find a big uplift?
Yeah, so I think that on the point around purpose, I think increasingly, particularly lots of the research around sort of Generation Z coming into the workforce, that sense of purpose mastery are really, really important. And that with so much choice in terms of where top tech talent can go, having a sense of organizational purpose that's bigger than just the kind of bottom line impact is vital. And I think even more so over COVID, feeling a sense of connectivity to an organization, and to the bigger kind of mission of that organization has been really important. And then linked to the point around productivity, particularly in the knowledge workspace, I think, as everyone knows, sort of productivity has sustained and in some instances improved. I think the balance that organizations had to strike is productivity versus burnout, and a real changing expectation of what a productive day looks like. I think for many people now, a productive day is Zoom meetings from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m, which just isn't actually productive or sustainable over a long period of time. And link back to the point around purpose, it's been the employers that have been able to support people's whole kind of work-life ecosystem. It's not just about providing, the health and safety training or the one-off support around well-being annually anymore. It's about understanding people as human beings and providing the support to that whole work life, not just the workout elements. Don't know if you've seen some similar, Cecilie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I think this goes for all telcos. Some were maybe not seen as the most attractive workplace, but during the pandemic, people working for a telco felt that they were more relevant and important and were empowering societies, enabling people to work remotely, enabling kids to have virtual school classes, etc., etc. So I think in all telcos, the motivation and the sense of purpose and importance and how people went over and beyond, if we could have bottled that energy from the first, half year, it would have been fantastic. And we saw things that I think that this is valid for most companies. We managed to do stuff that we never thought we would have done. I mean, we managed in Pakistan in 3 days to operate our networks from home in a country where we have 45 million customers. We moved customer service in Denmark in 24 hours to home offices, and we got better quality. And we had never dreamt about this, that we could do what we managed. So actually a year ago, already in the 3rd of June last year, the CEO of Telenor, Sigve Brekke, went out on television and said, we're never going back to how we worked before. And we started seeing that we could accelerate and change the way we work in so many different dimensions. So he wanted, from that point onwards, he wanted us to explore what flexible work would look like. So that was a year ago. And then he also wanted us to accelerate our touch-free operations because he'd seen what we could do. And he also wanted us to look into digitalization of customer interactions. So I think people have learned so much, and now it is important to put this in practice as vaccinations are progressing. I got my first one today, so I'm happy about that.
That's good.
Yes, and as societies, at least in Europe, are opening up after all. So it's important now to start exploring and practicing what we have learned, because I think in the research we've seen, you had this euphoria. Yeah. And then lots of people had met the fatigue and the corona wall. And so motivation dropped a bit. I think productivity was sustained, as you said, Freneka, where we could measure it, and we've measured it in customer service, network operation, etc. And then the question is, what now? Are we able to either sustain the level of today, or are we able to grow a bit in motivation to come to where we were at the top of the euphoria? That's the question now.
What do you think, Freneka? Do you think we need to learn how to manage? I mean, as you say, the 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. Zoom meetings are that's just rubbish, isn't it? It's just ludicrous how to do somebody in a very short time. So we need to learn how to manage this remotely a lot better. Do we feel there's a big skills gap there? And after the pandemic, I don't think we're going to go back to where we were in terms of going back into the office, are we?
Yeah, and I completely agree with the different skill sets, both from kind of managers, leaders, line managers, but also teams, in terms of how to communicate, how to collaborate, and how to make all of that work across different geographies, different time zones, in a way that over COVID, everyone was in the same boat. Leaders kind of knuckled down, and I think workforces sort of knuckled down because it was sort of almost crisis moment. So we all just buried our heads and carried on. I think emerging out of it, it's going to need a different kind of leader who can focus on outcomes over output, who can set guardrails but not define the answer. So the expectation is we work flexibly between these times, but I don't expect you, or I won't panic if you're not logged on at a certain hour, because there's a degree of kind of two-way trust that needs to be given. And I know, Cecilie, we talked about the kind of guardrails and almost like the rules of engagement, but moving away from very tight kind of log on, log off culture to much more flexibility, but two-way trust that needs to come with that. So I think if the past 12 to 18 months have been an experiment, I think there's more to come in terms of understanding how to make hybrid working a success, and understanding the changes in how we lead and manage teams and how we measure what success looks like, will also need to come. I think it's quite an exciting chance to re-look at lots of our traditional perceptions of performance management and of productivity and of the working week at the other extreme.
So I think sorry.
Yeah, I think we found the same, that we need to rethink some of our concepts, and especially when it comes to leadership, we felt that managing by walking around and that sort of thing doesn't really work when you have a flexible working pattern. So we are using this tight, loose, tight concept now when it comes to leadership, and that means the first tight is about setting direction, so that you start with a why and you mobilize your team around the purpose, and you define the goals and the desired impact based on your strategy, customer needs, etc. And then loose is about showing trust. So giving the teams autonomy to do what they are set out to do, to deliver on the outcomes, and also to create conditions of psychological safety so that people can take that autonomy and do something about it. And you're not supposed to sort of stay away, but to be the de-blocker whenever that is needed. And then the second tight, again, is about learning together and follow up the results and see what went okay and what didn't. And it's part of this creation of a high performance culture. So tight, loose, tight, and it's very easy to relate to. I mean, also across cultures, and we can ask each other and talk about leadership. And what's your strength? Is it the first tight, or is it sort of giving autonomy? Are you good enough on the follow-up and the learning, or do you just get on to the next task? So it's something, it's a very and it's not our concept, so feel to to use it and take it. It's for everybody, but it has resonated with a lot of people.
Now, my suspicion is that it probably falls apart. I don't mean your organisation specifically, but generally, I bet it often falls apart with a follow-up bit that doesn't happen. I bet that's
Often.
where it comes unstuck. Yeah. So you're rigorous about making sure that does happen, I guess.
Yes, and more teams work agile. So with agile methodology, this fits also very well, that you set out, you have goals, you have a sprint of a certain length, and then you have the follow-up afterwards. So it works well in all, no matter how you work, it fits.
Freneka, you were nodding your head there about working in agile teams. I'm also wondering if either or both of you've got anything to say about the increasing prevalence of cross-functional teams.
I think when you look at the kind of complexity of different skill sets that need to be brought together to solve some of the problems, it would be impossible to find them in a single team or even in a single function. And so I think cross-functional ways of working, teams, squads that are set up, brings together the different mindsets and problem solvers that you need. I think it does require a couple of enablers to be in place, from being able to relinquish resource and know that and trust in another team for another function, that they can still deliver to the outcomes that you need. So I think there is a real change in mindset. I think there's also a change in the sense of almost ambiguity, that sometimes you know what the end goal is, but you might not necessarily know what the journey to get there, and you've got to be comfortable that with each sprint you can reprioritize, relook at the backlog, and then move on to the next phase and kind of set the scope as you go. And I think for teams that have been used to delivering in more kind of waterfall ways for years on end, that's quite another significant sort of culture change. And then I would say the other enabler is from a resourcing perspective. So being able to have someone who can almost be the solution architect across multiple functions and know who to pull in and when, is another key sort of capability that needs to be in place for sort of agile working to be a success. Don't know if that resonates.
How does that person fulfill that role, though, of knowing who knows who? Because I mean, quite often when you work in an organisation, frankly, it doesn't even have to be that big. You don't really know what a lot of other people do. And I also think we all suffer from a little bit of looking at other people's jobs and thinking, how hard can it be, without having any clue actually about what's involved. I think it's just part of human nature somehow. So how do you know? I mean, do you have to ask other people you must have to ask other people a lot for the information you need, rather than just...
Well, I think often we're organized more like cross-functionally now it could be agile teams, but also some of the trends in how we work make some functions work together more closely than before. Like I was telling you, Annie, that the CTO of Telenor, she talks about ways of work, she talks about global teams, she talks about skills, she talks about my stuff as a CHRO. So we have very many places and arenas where we work together. And I think, for instance, IT and commercial, they work more together in every telco. So I think we are functions that didn't traditionally work as much together, they do that more than ever.
Okay. Do you think that will continue, that trajectory?
I think so. And one thing that we've been looking at is actually, this seems a bit contradictory, but we've been looking at our offices, and we've upgraded our offices because we think when we come back, maybe we will do different stuff when we actually meet up. So we made sure that our collaboration spaces are good, are better than they were before, and we have more types of collaboration spaces, because we think that we need to make people meet up at the office and get to know each other and collaborate, especially development tasks, innovation, creative tasks. We think that will happen more in the office and you will do more of your concentration work from home. So that is a consequence, and we're trying to make sure that we have more unexpected meetings. On Teams you see the same people all the time, unless you make a real effort to get to know new people. So at least in the office we should make sure that people actually mix up and they meet each other, whether they know each other or not. So we're trying to look at that aspect of it as well, of flexible work. What are we doing? What are we going to do when we turn up?
I think that changing purpose of the physical workplace as no longer being the place where you have to go to kind of get your head down and do work is really interesting. And I think the trend around organizations thinking about their physical working environment is somewhere you go to learn, somewhere you go to collaborate, somewhere you go to meet other people, as opposed to the place that you just go to do your job, has really changed, and almost taking an activity and task lens on what are the things that people do that benefit from being in a shared space versus what are the things that people benefit from doing at home. And when you have that view, we've shaped work modes, so different modes for different types of work, and recommendations on where they're best suited to being done.
Yeah.
I'm wondering as well about a lot of the skills we're going to need more of revolve around IT. Would that be a fair comment? Coding, data science, I think. And it seems to me there's this very large untapped resource called women, because in general, there aren't many who go into those sorts of careers. And do you think we're going to see women and girls seeing that as a really good opportunity? Do you think we're seeing a shift?
I really hope so. I think if you think about the 100-year life that we're all set to embark on, the stages of sort of education, work, retirement have really sort of been flipped on their head, and actually it's probably going to be education, work, back into education, maybe some time out, then back in, and that sort of change away from the mental model where women were often sort of that work time was shortcut because of family commitments. The flexible 100-year life means that actually more people, wherever you're a woman or a man, will be taking time out, back in, and I think that offers an opportunity. But also I think there has been a lot of really good energy around showing IT, digital as a real pathway for women. And I think there are some really great leaders who are taking on positions and sort of role modeling what that can look like.
But I think it's slow, so we have to push this. I mean, we have to appoint female CTOs. We have to support women and encourage them to take certain study certain disciplines at school. We have to make sure it happens, because otherwise I think our technologies will struggle in being relevant and good enough for women, and taking women's needs as consumers serious. So I think there's a case for us leaning forward here. But what I'm thinking is a good thing is, even in a company, in those functions that are where you have traditionally lots of women, in all functions now, like in the people function, I mean, technology is more important than ever. Automation is more important than ever. Digitalization of our processes. So I mean, it comes in everywhere. So whatever you start studying, you will meet technology sooner or later. It will be part of your workday, whether you like it or not. So that might encourage more women, as you were saying, maybe not as they start off with their careers, but afterwards it will be part of it.
So that's what I was wondering, that maybe you're going to get a movement towards the sort of technical and technology-based jobs, even though somebody maybe didn't start in those functions in the company, but sees that's a good place to be, and they've got the learning and the support of the organization behind them to move.
Yeah. Another interesting thing, I was thinking that what we learned during COVID was that there's a lot that can be done on structure as well, because we discovered that some layers in some of our parts of our organization became a bit redundant. So we were able to delayer the organization and increase the control span of managers during this pandemic, due to the fact that we worked more online. So it has challenged also our structures, and we're looking at how we can take that forward.
Have you got any thoughts on that? So.
Yeah, definitely. I think it links lots of the points that we've spoken about. One around greater agility, and sort of flattening the organisation so that you've got people able to feel that they can make autonomous decisions within guardrails. And then it also links the first point that we touched on, really, which was around building almost the capability for organisations to continually be assessing their shape, their workforce mix, that translation of the business strategy into how do we organise and operate. And I think we started with the question of how do you know what the skills are for 2030, and we probably don't. But what's more important is that you've got the ability to, the kind of muscle in the organisation to be constantly challenging, taking action against that, and then saying, have we got the answer right? And we probably won't have it, but continually doing that. And it's less of a kind of one-time activity now and more of a constant treadmill, really, for business and HR leaders.
I know, but that's kind of fun, isn't it? I remember when I first started working in publishing, I was taken to a printer somewhere near Maidstone and introduced to this chap. He was in his 80s. He'd started to work there at the age of 12. And he was kind of rolled out, this poor chap, like he was some sort of human sort of, exhibit almost. And he was awfully proud of the fact. And I thought I could think of nothing worse than being in the same job for 70, whatever it was, years. But I mean, we've kind of gone right to the other end of the scale probably now. And maybe change your job within the organisation. You don't start in a job, as we keep saying, and stick in it, a function, a lot of movement around. Do you think after the pandemic, we're going to see a really big range of reactions by companies about what they want their workforce to do, like whether they want them to go in most of the time, some of the time? And do you think it's going to be a big factor in recruitment and people, choosing? I mean, somebody tried to give me a job where I had to go and work in an office.
Yeah. We've seen that. I actually talked to our recruiting staff last week, and they said everybody's talking about the fact that we have, as Telenor, gone out so clearly and said we will continue with flexibility. We will not ask everybody to come back to the office. So they say that's a big factor for us in remaining attractive. And we also have this, as part of our group, we have a company in Finland with 1,500 people, and they have worked flexibly for 8 years before the pandemic. So we have sort of another experience that we can learn from, and they have people come into the office around 2 days a week, and that's when they have the flexibility, when they have the freedom to choose. But as they also say, it's not the individual freedom to choose. It's also a question of what makes sense depending on the role you've got, depending on the job you've got to do, and depending on your unit. So you've got to find out together with your unit, when should you meet up? Because we have had experiments, pilots during this COVID time when we were allowed to come in a bit to the office, and people came in and they met nobody from their team, and they want to, when they actually come in, they want to meet people from their team. So it can't be totally an individual decision, but everybody, I mean, 80% in surveys we have of our people would like to continue with flexible work. So there is no doubt that this is what is expected, desired, and we need to continue this to sustain motivation. That's for sure.
Okay, I have a question for somebody, one of our delegates, and they say, what do we think about, well, no, I think, what's the panel think about Goldman Sachs bringing everybody back to the office? And they're saying research shows younger employees want to get back to the office to help visibility and career progression. I think that's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Do you want to go? Shall I go? So I think, in terms of Goldman Sachs and a lot of the big banks, there's been a real sort of polar response where you've had some organizations, Spotify's Salesforce is saying we'll move to a very flexible model, some in the middle saying we'll do a 3-day and a 2-day, and then some like Goldman saying everyone needs to get back in. And I think along that spectrum, there's almost you're missing the point of what flexibility should mean. It should be the coming together of what your employees need, what the business need is, and then bringing those two angles together, plus sort of your location and overall business strategy to come up with something that works for those parties. And there'll be tension in the system, but whether it's 3 or 2 days, it's sort of irrelevant, because it needs to be rooted in what's the purpose of coming to work and what needs to be done there. I think that previously, pre-pandemic, a large part of an employee value proposition, a lot of sort of leading organizations was around the offer in the physical environment. So the Google and all the food they provided, all the amazing offices. Yeah. I think now the marker of a great organization will be the ability to listen to their employees, the ability to respond to that, but also the ability to provide some form of flexibility, whether that's in days in the office or in different models for where you work, so geographical flexibility. But I don't think that the sort of Goldman Sachs mandate will work for a lot of organisations.
I've got a cynical response, and that is they've just spent $2.5 billion rebuilding in Park Avenue. And so that's going to look very like a white elephant if they don't get the employees back in there, right? And I imagine the shareholders might not be overjoyed at the investment. But there is
one point in this, which is that the younger people have typically had a worse time than others during the pandemic, because some of them went to a new city to take up a job, and they don't have an environment, and they counted a lot on the social environment at work, and they have been sitting in bed sits in small places. And so they, but even though they are desperate to get back now, they still want flexibility, but it might not be the same as everybody else's flexibility. But sometimes it is just to avoid being stuck in public transport in the morning. It could be the ability to come in much quicker a few hours later. The young people definitely want flexibility, but they also want to get back into work, into the office.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're younger, it's a completely different issue for those and other reasons. I'm afraid we've run out of time, which is a bit sad because it's a great conversation. I'd like to thank you both for your time and your inputs. Very enjoyable, very educational. And I hope we'll see you again.